Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Cha of the AHIN Secretariat, and good evening to our speaker. Thanks for joining AHIN Hour, our bi-monthly webinar series where we feature topics on e-health, health information systems, and information technology for civil registration and civil statistics. Well, it's been a while since our last webinar, and we hope that everyone's excited for this session as we are. Our webinars are recorded via WebEx and will be made accessible online after the session. To get things started, here are a few reminders: the platform, how to participate, and the email feedback. Using Cisco WebEx Event Center, if you're having difficulties in joining, log out the session and rejoin through the link sent to you by WebEx, or by entering the meeting room number 862-252-587 as seen in your screens. And our password for today's webinar is Australia123. Your mic will be muted throughout the meeting, but you can chat your thoughts to us through the chat panel. And for questions, kindly type them in the Q&A tab, and our speaker will be answering your questions after the lecture. You will receive a survey after the session. Kindly answer it so we can send the resources of the session to you. Today's webinar is about the relationships among quality guidelines, maturity models, architecture, and implementation strategies as interrelated parts of the telehealth puzzle, which will be discussed. And then our speaker for today is Mr. Alan Taylor. He is a member of the Standards Australia IT 01412 Telehealth Working Group and the ISCO TC215 Health Informatics Committee. He led the development of the recently published ISO TS 13131 Health Informatics Telehealth Services Quality Planning Guidelines. He is currently researching the sustainability of telehealth services. One of his interests is the informal and formal practices, guidelines, standards, and architectures associated with telehealth. He recently managed an Australian Telehealth in the Home initiative, supporting palliative and supportive care and aged care. Mr. Alan Taylor has 20 years of experience in the telecommunications, consultancy, and healthcare business in Europe and Africa as an academic, ICT strategist, architect, and project manager. He has led numerous health and emergency services initiatives, providing telehealth and remote decision support, information systems, telecommunications, and networks. Without further ado, let's now welcome our speaker, Mr. Alan Taylor. Hello.
Hello, everyone. I hope everyone can see the slide title. Please let us know if you can't.
Mr. Allen, I think the slides aren't loaded yet. Could you click share?
Okay.
All right, it's loading now. Thank you.
Okay, so that looks good. Okay, has everyone got that in a readable form?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Good. Okay, so I'd like to thank everyone for giving up an hour of their time today to listen to this presentation. I hope we will have a useful discussion at the end, and I hope everyone has a prosperous new year. And in this part of the world, the rainy season is coming. I'm in Brisbane, and it looks like it's going to rain soon. So I hope everyone stays safe over the Christmas and New Year period. So without further ado, I'd like to explain the title, which is quite long, of this presentation. So we're really looking at a number of aspects, and hopefully you can see that I'm concerned about being able to plan for successful telehealth and e-health implementations. So important to those implementations are guidelines, and I'll talk considerably about guidelines. But the guidelines can help us derive suitable architectures and decide if we're ready. And by ready, I'm talking about maturity. Are our services and our support systems mature enough to do what we want? Once we establish that, then we can go forward to design an implementation strategy. So it's a bit of a journey. Guidelines help us decide what we want. The recently published ISO guidelines, Health Informatics Telehealth Services Quality Planning Guidelines, are really a tool to help us decide what sort of telehealth and e-health services we want. Architecture helps us fit the parts together, and I'm not just talking about the technical parts, but also the people parts, the governance parts, the process parts. Some of you will also be very well aware of the ISO maturity model on health informatics and e-health architecture roadmaps. Those are part of the picture too. And to finish, I'll talk a little bit about implementation strategies, which need to incorporate what we learn through our guidelines and our architecture and our maturity assessments. So the first question we need to ask is, why have guidelines? Two reasons. Firstly, guidelines add credibility. Second reason, guidelines can decrease the risk to your project, decrease the risk to your program. If you have a system of assessing what the risks are, and you can develop some guidelines to help avoid those risks, then the guidelines have done their job. When do we use guidelines? Well, three main times when guidelines are used. When you want to start a new program, when you're training staff who may be new, and when you're assessing the quality and safety of your program. Particularly in healthcare, we are very interested in quality and safety. So guidelines can be very useful when you're assessing the viability, the safety and the quality of a health service that is being delivered. Now, to some, it may seem that guidelines are an extra demand on their time. Do I really need to understand all this stuff before I start something? Well, the answer is really that the best guidelines are simple guidelines. They should be clear and they should be obvious. They should tell you what you can do, what you can't do, what you need to consider. And obviously, if guidelines are not suitable for your particular circumstances, your particular project, your particular organization, your particular health service, then they're no use to you. So the best guidelines are adaptable to your situation, to your organization, and to your culture. The best guidelines also support improvement, and they support change, and they support innovation. Guidelines which are too rigid and put a jail around you are not really going to help you in the long term. They may protect you for a short period of time, but when things change, you'll have no way of moving forward. So the ISO guidelines that I'm going to talk about are in the International Standards Organization language of specification. That is, they're not intended to be used as rules that must be followed in every situation. So they're very different to a product specification or a regulation that demands compliance. And it's up to every individual organization to apply guidelines like these to their own situation. It's worthwhile noting that the scope of these ISO guidelines are not designed to be applied in the same way to every country. I'm not sure how many countries we have online, but you'll probably all have a different way of going about things. And you need to adapt guidelines to your specific situation. These guidelines are also not designed to apply to general purpose ICT services, such as computers, computer networks, or even to specialized medical devices, for which there are very different standards, specifications, and guidelines, which vary from country to country. So the scope of telehealth guidelines from ISO are quality and safety management, development of quality characteristics for telehealth services, and quality objectives and procedures. So quality characteristics help us determine the principles that should be applied to telehealth services. And the objectives and procedures help us decide what needs to be done and how to do it. So, for instance, telehealth quality characteristics for telehealth services aim to improve quality of life and quality of care. Some examples will help make this clearer. A good service will be transparent, accountable, and efficient. So, for instance, it will be clear what the money is being spent on. It will be clear that the program is working efficiently. And it will be clear what sort of health outcomes are being aimed at. In healthcare, we're usually particularly interested in delivering services as widely as possible. So accessibility of services, particularly in countries that have regions that are difficult to get to. And this is a picture of a Land Rover in Australia traveling between regional communities. We have these sorts of accessibility issues in Australia. So it's important that we consider them when we're designing health services. And health services normally need to be inclusive. They need to be accessible by the population, regardless of who they are. Other examples of quality characteristics: usability. If you can't use a health service, whether it's delivered face-to-face or whether it's delivered through a device, through an electronic medium, you're going to get very frustrated. It needs to be effective and hit the bullseye, hit the target. It needs to be safe. We don't want to kill patients. We don't want to hurt patients in any way. So the safety of what we do is very important. Now, there may be situations in which all of these sorts of quality characteristics may not apply. And it depends what sort of service you're delivering and what sort of organisation you are. There may be organisations who are concerned mainly to deliver a profitable service to a particular population group. They may not worry about whether or not a telehealth service or a health service is in fact accessible across the country. And that's fine. They need to determine that, but guidelines will still be important to them, but different sorts of guidelines. Quality and safety in healthcare is key. Quality and safety systems depend on other ISO standards such as ISO 9000 and risk management standards such as 3100. There are other standards, and it's certainly, I'm probably sure that you will have your own risk procedures, risk management procedures, but all of these meshing together to help a health service or a hospital determine what is safe and what is not safe. And most hospitals will have some sort of safety and quality guidelines, and they will audit themselves or be audited on a fairly regular basis to ensure that they are providing safe and effective care. So telehealth is no different. It should be no different. Telehealth depends on quality management. Telehealth has risks that need to be assessed. And the guidelines that have been published by ISO do rely on the two principal ISO standards of risk management and quality management. So what are the risks to telehealth? Well, here's some possible risks. Not necessarily all the risks that you might face. Firstly, financial management. Is the service well managed financially? Is it cost effective? Will it survive more than a few months, or will it run out of money? Secondly, facilities management. Many types of telehealth do depend on there being electronic networks in place that work and work reasonably well. They depend on whether or not you can provide appropriate conditions for computer equipment, whether or not you can provide appropriate conditions for therapists or doctors, for instance, to use video conferencing. So that's what we mean by facilities. Another risk area is technology management. Many people may assume that technology is the easy bit, it just needs to be plugged in and it works. We know that there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes, and it's good that it goes on behind the scenes. But what goes on behind the scenes is important because it determines whether or not the technology works seamlessly, or whether or not faults, disruptions and so on are going to impact the efficient, effective and safe delivery of a telehealth service. So technology management is key. Management, many of you will be familiar with the issues around information management, is also another area of risk. Privacy, regulations, laws and expectations vary from organisation to organisation, country to country. Security issues vary, and how we manage health information may vary too. But we need to understand what our requirements are within an organisation, within a country. Information can be misused or lost, and that can impact not only the organisation, but also the patient. So guidelines can be applied in many aspects of telehealth delivery. And you can see on this particular slide that telehealth delivery encompasses more than just the technology. There's quality management, which is the overall process of determining the effectiveness of a service. There's financial management that we talked about briefly. There's service planning. There's workforce planning and healthcare planning. If you like, those are softer areas along with healthcare responsibilities. Softer areas of health service delivery, but nevertheless very important. If you can't understand what the health service is that you're delivering and who's delivering it and where it's being delivered, then you're off to a very poor start. And obviously in delivering healthcare, the doctors, the nurses and other people that provide healthcare have some responsibilities, and they may change in a telehealth environment. There's a new situation, a new environment in which people have to work. So they have some varied responsibilities to ensure that they're doing a good job. Facilities management we've spoken about, as we have technology management and information management. We'll go into these in a little more detail. Financial management. Have you got a business case? Have you got a financial plan? Have you looked at the costs, benefits and affordability and sustainability? And as your telehealth services grow, or hopefully you have a plan to make them grow, you can begin to reduce unit costs and make the service more efficient. These are just examples. There may be other things that you need to consider. Service planning. Accessible, appropriate and inclusive telehealth services. I put there a symbol from actually Brazil, where they have a Sistema Único de Saúde. It's called SUS, and the objective in Brazil is to provide one universal health service, which is inclusive. So that is at the core of their service planning. Service levels. When is a telehealth service available? Is it going to be available at midnight? It may not be possible for it to be available at midnight, but you need to be able to tell people that it won't be. Service design. How long are your queues going to be? Can you actually deliver what you promise? So you need to dimension your services appropriately right from the start. Workforce planning. Does your workforce feel it's ready to use a different set of tools to deliver healthcare? Have you talked to the workforce? Do you know what they feel? Do you know what they need? Do you know what they need to learn? What qualifications do they need? All of these things need to be considered, but a motivated workforce will go a long way to delivering a new service, whether it's a telehealth service or any other sort of service. Healthcare planning. Is the healthcare that you're delivering efficient, effective, safe, and appropriate? Do you have some plans, guidelines, and protocols? So a simple example of a guideline or a protocol is a triage, and it can be 3-level triages or 5-level triages. But triages help you direct care in the right direction and direct the patients in the right direction within an acceptable period of time. But with telehealth, there is something slightly different. What happens when telehealth stops working? When the computers go down, when the electricity goes off. When the electricity goes off, hopefully many services in the hospital will continue to function, or the hospital will have a backup generator. Telehealth, there are many more things that can go wrong. What do you do when that happens? That has to be part of your healthcare planning. So if your sophisticated telehealth system goes down, do you go back to the telephone? Do you go back to paper? Are you ready to do that? Healthcare responsibilities. By this we mean, do the patients fully understand their healthcare plan? In other words, what the doctors, what the nurses are going to do with them, how the doctors are going to work with them, what's going to happen, when it's going to happen. If you're delivering telehealth care directly to patients, perhaps using a mobile device, do the users of those mobile devices understand what to do? We found in doing a telehealth to the home program in Adelaide in South Australia with an elderly group of patients, one of the key issues was ensuring the patients knew how to switch the mobile device on and off. Sounds simple, but if you look at a number of devices, it's not obvious where the on-off button is. And sometimes it works in strange ways. So we're responsible for that as healthcare providers. Facilities management. Now, I've already touched on this. You can see a photo in the top right-hand corner of in this case, a speech therapist in what looks to be quite a decent environment. They've got a patient on screen on the left-hand side. They've got a speech pathology tool test exercise on the right-hand screen. Everything looks great. There were a few hidden issues behind that photo. Adelaide has very high temperatures, and the air conditioning couldn't cope very well with those temperatures. And in that particular room, I'll tell you in total confidence that it got pretty hot for that poor therapist. So next time, we'll look for better air conditioning. Patients and family are also a consideration when you're thinking about facilities. Where is the patient or person going to be when they're accessing a telehealth service? Are they going to be on a train, or they're going to be in the comfort of their home and set up and able to participate properly or understand properly a course of treatment? Technology management. Now, I'm not sure how many people out there are actually technologists, but I do feel that many people in the telehealth world forget about the need to manage technology. So it's worthwhile reinforcing the need for technology management. The need for technology is dependable, efficient, and usable. One of the tools that we have in our toolbox as technologists is the Information Technology Infrastructure Library, which is ITIL for short. And that toolbox recognizes that service delivery is not just about operation of equipment. It's not simply about switching equipment on and off and fixing problems. It's about having a series of processes to ensure that things work and things are checked to be working at regular intervals. And when they don't work, there's a series of processes to find someone who actually knows how to fix the problem in a reasonable amount of time. So that's why technology management is so important and why it's been included in these guidelines. For example, is sorts of things that technology management can include: service support, service delivery, infrastructure, deployment. How do you actually deploy a telehealth or an e-health service? What are the steps you need to go through? When you take it away, redesign it, how do you need to do it? I've got a great personal example stemming out of the UK at the moment, where my mother-in-law is complaining because her local doctor, primary care doctor, has closed down their surgery for 3 weeks because they're having a computer upgrade. How ridiculous is that? Something has gone wrong in the planning there. Operations. How do you know that your service is working? And technical support is not just about fixing things, it's also about being proactive and researching current state of knowledge, evaluating what's happening, documenting what's happening, and giving good quality advice to management and clinicians. Information management. Again, I touched on this. Information needs to be confidential, dependable, and safe. You don't want to lose patient information. You don't want to lose any information, really. You need to know who you're talking to. And that may not be very clear over a telehealth system. You need to know that you've got the right electronic record for the right person. And your quality of data needs to be as good as it would be in a face-to-face consultation. So one of the things I'd like to do today is have a little bit of discussion with you about the following things. Firstly, we have guidelines, we have telehealth guidelines, we have many, many sorts of guidelines and standards. Do they actually help? Do guidelines help us build architectures for telehealth? Do guidelines help assess maturity and capacity to implement telehealth? In other words, do guidelines help us understand if we're ready to do something? When we're implementing a telehealth service, should we worry about guidelines? And assuming we've done everything according to the cookbook, according to the guidelines, a good question to ask is, will this mean that something will automatically work and work successfully? So in trying to answer some of these questions, I began to develop a telehealth architectural model, which I'll call TAM, T-H-A-M. And the basis for this model was, in fact, previous work which has been done within ISO and within WHO to develop an e-health architectural model and maturity model. And it's called ISO. Number one of these ISO numbers, ISO TR 14639-1. And that model does draw on experiences from many countries, including Australia, Brazil, Canada, India, and Kenya. It's 2 or 3 years old now, at least, but it's still pretty useful. And I'm seeing some countries adapting this sort of model for their own purposes, which is great. So an example of one use of an architectural model, and we'll have a picture of this in a minute. An example of its use would be when you're looking at a primary healthcare service. assess where you are. If you don't have any records at all, or paper records, if you don't have any telecommunications or data interconnectivity, if you look at the red ellipse at the bottom of the screen, if your technology is up to it, then maybe you are limited in what you can do with telehealth or e-health. So that's basically the concept of a maturity model. Some things you can do now, or you assess that you can do some things now. You get to a certain point, you improve connectivity, you improve the way you manage data, you improve the way that you identify patients, and you can begin to do more. So you have a higher capacity, a higher level of maturity. So ISO again developed, this was last year it was published, a more detailed maturity model, with the same number, second edition if you like, which describes e-health services, processes, components and policies. And it takes the maturity concept and tries to provide an organized approach to investments in ICT, to guide planning, develop common principles, policies and specifications. And I certainly recommend this document for use by large organizations. A small organization might find parts of that particular ISO document difficult to navigate, although it would have some aspects which are important to even the smallest health service. So an example of telehealth architecture that we developed for a telehealth in the home project in South Australia is shown on screen. And this has the usual sort of house diagram, where there's a foundation bit at the bottom and a roof at the top. And the roof at the top is about the outcomes: improved access to care, improved quality of care. The bit at the bottom, the foundations, for us in delivering the telehealth services, the foundations were not technical foundations. They were in fact the patients. Patients were fundamental. Patients didn't like what we were doing, then the service would have just disappeared, would have not been as successful. But there were technical foundations, such as commodity devices like iPhones, iPads, etc., computer networks, telecommunications, storage, support, and health records, of course. The interesting thing about this particular architecture is that we found that a lot of the healthcare processes effectively had been or were incorporated in the devices and software that we used. And moreover, those processes, those services were very specific to a particular discipline. So we had palliative care patients that needed one sort of set of devices, one sort of software, one sort of care. We had rehabilitation patients who needed a different set of devices, different set of processes, and different care. So this is a picture which really tries to highlight that a lot of telehealth is very discipline specific, and increasingly nowadays a lot of healthcare processes and services are incorporated in the technology that we use. So this is quite a different picture to one of a national healthcare information technology system, which will have pictures of e-health medical record systems, and then may or may not refer to discipline-specific applications. And what this is suggesting to me, and this is an item for discussion that I'd like to see what people think, is that a lot of healthcare is so discipline-specific that we should be worrying less about implementing huge systems at great cost and more about implementing smaller systems that may be discipline-specific that can actually talk to each other. Lastly, but not least, when we're looking at developing a telehealth service, we have to implement it. So implementation, as I mentioned before, can gain a lot from use of processes. And the processes that I'm referring to here are ISO and ITIL, Information Technology Infrastructure Library processes, which include things like designing technology, having some strategy to roll it out, looking at the health service design, transitioning a service into operations, operating it, and lastly but not least, improving the service. So a picture of an implementation of a telehealth service could well look something like this. Where you start with design, which is dependent to some extent on guidelines. You go through planning, governance, and benefit stages. Is it going to be useful? Is it going to be useful to a health service? What are the healthcare planning issues? What are the facilities you need? How do you transition that into service? How do you configure, test, and support it? Once it's operating, how do you deal with requests, incidents, and problems? Once it's operating, do you care? Do you care how well it's operating it? Do you measure what's going on? Do you report what's happening? And do you have information on which to base improvements in the design or the way the healthcare is delivered? So if you like, showing here a cycle, an implementation cycle, at the core of which guidelines can be quite fundamental. And this is a discussion point that we can talk about now, I think. And I think we're just about done. Yes, so the big question is, we've got these guidelines, we've got these tools. Do they help us? Will they help us? Who's using guidelines? What's your experience? And at that point, I'd like to throw this session out for questions and discussion, please.
All right, thank you for the comprehensive lecture, Mr. Allen. Everybody, those who want to ask questions, you may type in your questions as a Q&A panel. But if you can't find it, you can just chat it through the chat panel. Okay, so we have a few questions already. The first one is from one of our attendees, and it reads, is there a certified training program for 13131? How can countries enroll?
Should I answer that now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, the answer is no, there isn't a certified training program for ISO 13131. Probably 3 reasons for that at the moment, 3 or 4. Firstly, it's very new. Secondly, the standard, well, the specification itself is very high level. And it's really intended for organizations to take and customize to their own needs. And once they've done that, then yes, they may wish to develop training, they may wish to develop certification. And I think it would be very useful to have some real-life examples of people doing that in the future, because that will help test and verify whether or not these sorts of guidelines are useful or not, and may help us improve those guidelines. But sorry, there's no certification at the moment because they're not intended for direct certification, and consequently there are no training courses. But there are people who can help you customize these sorts of guidelines to your own service needs.
All right, thank you, Mr. Allen. For the second question, it's from Dr. Alvin Marcelo of the Asia eHealth Information Network. His question is, AHIN released a paper at Global Telehealth 2015 on national telehealth programs in Asia. They may be interested in applying 13131. What should they do?
Can you just repeat the first part of that question, please?
Okay, AHIN released a paper at Global Telehealth 2015 on national telehealth programs in Asia. They may be interested in applying for 13131. What should they do?
If they want to apply 13131 to a particular service, what should they do? If I understand that question correctly, I'm not sure I have. Apologies if I haven't. Firstly, you need to get the standard. Unfortunately, you will have to pay ISO for that. That's their business model. I personally believe all these health standards should be free, but you should buy that document off ISO and discuss it within your own organization, and that will help you develop your service further.
Hi, Alan. This is Alvin.
Hi, Alvin.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very helpful. My question was mostly about so in that paper we had about 11 telehealth programs at national scale in quotation marks from 8 countries, and I think that they are in a good position to apply 13131. But how would they do that? Do they just buy the document and apply it by themselves, or is there a community of 13131 consulting services, or how? So is it really more about just doing it on your own, or would there be a network of similarly situated telehealth programs doing the same thing and going through the journey at the same time? Over.
Mm-hmm. Very good question. Answer to one part of your question is that at the moment there isn't a formal community of telehealth quality and safety, for telehealth quality and safety planning. There are a number of countries interested in beginning to try and apply these sorts of guidelines. Brazil is one, the Netherlands is another, and there is a lot of interest in the UK in guidelines with slightly different emphasis. Those are the ones that come to my mind. If people need help, there are probably two directions you should go for help. Firstly is your own people who are involved in safety and quality assessments and risk assessments in your health service. They should be your first port of call. Secondly, there are secondly, I can put you in touch with other people who are interested, and I can also provide some help myself. It would be useful perhaps to begin to develop a community which could provide self-help amongst its participants.
Okay, let's do that, Alan. Let's
Okay.
talk about this offline. Thanks.
Right.
All right, thank you, Dr. Marcelo and Mr. Allen. So for the next question, it's from Miss Alia Evangelista. She's asking, in Asia, we do not have much skilled human resources for telehealth implementations, graduates of health informatics, project managers, etc. So what small steps can we do to equip or prepare our human resources to man telehealth projects?
Okay, well, my answer to that is don't be scared. You probably have a lot more skills than you think you have. And a key thing now is that much of this technology is technology that is available everywhere. It's consumer technology. A lot of telehealth can be implemented using consumer technology. People can use a mobile, people can use a website, people can program a website. If they understand the applications and the consequences of applying technology to healthcare, it could be just sending a simple series of SMSs to patients to remind them to go to an appointment or take a pill. So you may not be doing anything hugely difficult. So the main thing is to prepare your people to imagine and think and try and educate them to do things safely and check out, understand what the risks are. If the SMS doesn't go to the patient to remind them to take their pill, what are the potential consequences? So simple questions like that. So I don't think you need to be thinking that, oh, I can only do this when I've got people with a huge amount of experience that I have to pay a lot of money to. You can do a lot now. Next question.
Yes, thank you. The next question is from Dr. Janaka. It reads, what are the basic fundamentals used to develop small-scale telehealth systems?
Okay, that's quite a difficult question because I believe that you don't want to have a telehealth system that is so small that is inefficient or ineffective. So there may be some telehealth services which, by their nature, maybe they serve a small group of patients, will be small and always remain small. Now, as to the first part of your question, what are the basic fundamentals? I think the fundamentals are assess the risk. Firstly, understand what you want to do. What sort of service you want to deliver, to who, to where, what do you want to deliver, what are the risks, and then you can begin to develop the solution. How are you going to do it? So those are the fundamentals. It's not about the technology, it's about understanding what you want to do and what are the issues in what you want to do. Thanks.
All right, so for the next question, it's from Dr. Rosa Ayu. It reads, telehealth is a new thing for me. How was the acceptance of this approach in the other countries?
Okay. I'd perhaps reflect. Telehealth can mean many things. It can mean many types of clinical service, and the use of many types of technologies. So maybe it's not new to you. Maybe you already use it. Maybe you already use the telephone. I'm sure you use the telephone. That's telehealth. So I think in most countries there is already an element of telehealth, telemedicine in action now today, and it is accepted. Perhaps looking at your question from another point of view about acceptance of a new service, that is a complicated issue. There are many reasons why a patient or a doctor or an organization may not accept a new approach. And I think you need to work through a process of gaining confidence and building expertise and building support for these sorts of services, whatever country you're in. Thanks.
There's a follow-up question for that, Mr. Allen. It reads, how can this approach be suitable for middle-income countries?
I don't know if the questioner would like to clarify this question at all. The approach is meant to be suitable for any country. Different countries will apply it in different ways according to their needs and their abilities. So the approach is not written. Don't assume that if you are able to obtain a copy of the guidelines, don't assume they're written for the United States or Europe or Australia for that matter. They're written for use and application by any country. And I've just seen the following question, which asks, where can I download ISO 13131? Only from ISO website. Yes, unfortunately, only from the ISO website. I'd love to send people on the call a copy, but I would get into huge trouble if I did that. So yes, the summary that I've given in this slide is a reasonably good high-level summary. But yeah, you can only get it from the ISO website, and you have to pay real money to do that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Allen. There's another question. It reads, my question is about technological aspects. How did Australia build a national network infrastructure to support telehealth services at national level? Or each state has different network infrastructure?
Okay, big question there. I won't be able to answer it completely now. The answer is, in some respects, Australian e-health infrastructure is national. In other respects, it is not national at all. It's state-based. It may be even only regional-based. I think that's in part because there isn't actually a clear business case for national telehealth infrastructure. There is a national business case for an e-health information infrastructure. So there's a lot of variety, and different countries will have different approaches.
All right, thank you, Mr. Allen. So that wraps up our question and answer portion for this webinar. We would like to thank you, Mr. Allen, for spending us your time and sharing your expertise with all of our attendees. And thank you to all our attendees who actively participated for this webinar.
That's good. Can I just add, if there's some questions which I haven't been able to answer because of limitations of time, I'm happy if those questions are forwarded to me and I can answer by email.
Yes, we'll be forwarding the questions to you, Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
Fine.
Thank you very much. We'll follow up by email from the 8 countries. Over.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
All right. Take care.
Yes, please answer the survey, everyone. We'll be sending them via emails. And we'll keep you posted for the next webinars. Thank you.